The world turns white. Horizon, sky, and ground merge into a single featureless void as wind punches snow sideways with a force that makes standing difficult. You are a courier in the 13th century, a leather pouch strapped beneath layers of wool and fur, carrying a message that must reach the next station before nightfall, except the path you walked just yesterday has vanished under drifting snow, and the familiar ridge that should be on your left has dissolved into nothing. Your lungs burn with cold air, your eyelashes freeze together between blinks, and a single thought cuts through rising panic. Which way is forward? How did ancient couriers survive this moment, repeated across countless journeys through some of the harshest terrain on Earth? Here is what history reveals, and it contradicts an assumption we carry from modern times. They did not survive blizzards by having better instincts or superhuman endurance. They survived because navigation was never treated as a solo skill to be mastered by exceptional individuals. It was an engineered system, a choreography of memory, infrastructure, and human networks that made the impossible merely dangerous. Understanding their survival begins with grasping what a blizzard actually destroys, not just visibility, but every reference point your brain uses to locate itself in space, to distinguish forward from backward, safety from death. To understand why blizzard navigation was so lethal, consider what the human mind needs to move with purpose through any landscape. We orient ourselves through landmarks, a distinctive tree, a bend in the river, the angle of a distant mountain against the horizon. In clear conditions, even unfamiliar terrain offers constant clues. The sun's position, the length of shadows, the shape of the land as it rises and falls ahead. A blizzard erases all of this in minutes. When visibility drops to a few meters and the ground becomes indistinguishable from the sky, a phenomenon known as whiteout destroys depth perception entirely, and what follows can be fatal even for experienced travelers. Couriers and wayfarers across many eras have reported the terrifying sensation of not knowing whether they were walking uphill or downhill, whether the ground ahead was solid or a cliff edge dropping into nothing. The wind adds another layer of disorientation. It shifts direction unpredictably around obstacles and terrain features, meaning you cannot rely on keeping the wind at a consistent angle to maintain your course for more than short stretches. Worse still, the cold itself degrades judgment in ways that are difficult to recognize from the inside. As body temperature drops, mental clarity fades, decisions become slower, and the brain begins to make errors it would never make in warmth, taking wrong turns, misremembering landmarks, or surrendering to the dangerous temptation to sit down and rest. The question is not whether ancient couriers found this terrifying, they certainly did, but how they managed to survive often enough that their messenger systems could function reliably across seasons and years. The answer begins with a distinction that modern people, equipped with maps and electronic navigation, often miss entirely. Wayfinding is not the same as map navigation. We imagine navigation as consulting a chart, plotting coordinates, following a compass bearing through abstracted space. Ancient couriers operated according to a fundamentally different logic. Their navigation was built on mental maps, internal representations of routes constructed through repeated travel over months and years, reinforced by oral tradition passed from experienced couriers to newcomers. A courier who had traveled a route dozens of times did not perceive it as a series of abstract directions. He knew it as a sequence of landmarks experienced in order. The stream crossing where ice formed early in the season, the rock shaped like a sleeping animal, the exposed slope where wind always drifted snow to the eastern edge, the hollow where shelter was possible if conditions worsened. This was wayfinding, and its power lay in familiarity so deep it became almost automatic, requiring little conscious thought under normal conditions. But here is the catch that made blizzards so deadly. Mental maps require landmarks to anchor them. In a blizzard, when those landmarks vanish beneath snow and behind walls of white, even experienced couriers could lose the sequence and spiral into confusion. This is why route systems across the ancient and medieval world were never purely cognitive achievements. They were embedded in physical infrastructure, and that infrastructure was the real engine of survival across courier networks, from the steppes of Central Asia to the mountain passes of Europe to the high plateaus of the Andes. Organized courier systems across many regions invested heavily in making routes survivable through infrastructure, rather than relying on individual skill alone. The Roman cursus publicus, the official state courier network, maintained stations for rest and horse changes spaced at regular intervals along major roads throughout the empire. Roads crossing mountain passes were engineered with navigation specifically in mind, cleared or paved surfaces that remained visible longer as snow accumulated. Milestones serving as physical reference points, even in reduced visibility, and local populations contracted to maintain routes and provide guidance when conditions turned dangerous. Centuries later, across the vast reaches of the Mongol Empire, the Yam system created relay stations that allowed messages to cross continents with speed that astonished contemporary observers throughout Eurasia. These stations were deliberately placed close enough that a rider in deteriorating conditions never had to travel an impossible distance before reaching shelter, fresh horses, and human contact. The spacing itself was a form of navigation aid that many overlook. If a station was supposed to appear after a certain distance and did not, you had immediate information that you had drifted off course, information that could save your life if you acted on it quickly. Chinese imperial post systems employed similar principles in northern regions where winter storms were common and expected. In the high Andes, Inca Chasqui runners were supported by tambos relay stations providing shelter and supplies at intervals along the royal roads. What all these systems shared, despite vast differences in geography and culture, was recognition that no individual courier could outperform the environment through skill or courage alone. Navigation had to be distributed across infrastructure that did much of the work before any rider set out. But here is the deeper secret, and it fundamentally reframes everything about blizzard survival. The real navigation was not done inside the storm. It was done before the storm ever arrived. Route design was the first and most important layer of protection. Experienced planners chose paths following linear features, ridgelines, river valleys, fence lines, forest edges that provided natural guides even when visibility dropped to almost nothing. A courier following a river corridor could not drift far off course because the terrain itself constrained movement. Ridge routes had their own logic. Wind often scoured snow from exposed crests, leaving bare ground or hard-packed surfaces identifiable by feel underfoot, though the same exposure made them brutally cold and occasionally dangerous in high winds. Physical markers extended this principle into terrain where natural features were sparse or unreliable. Stone cairns, wooden poles, and trees blazed with distinctive cuts created artificial landmarks designed to survive under snow. In some regions, particularly across open plateaus, long lines of poles or stacked stones stretched across otherwise featureless terrain specifically to guide winter travelers. These markers did not need to be visible from great distances. That was impossible in a blizzard anyway. They needed to be findable. A courier in a blizzard might move forward slowly, sweeping back and forth across the expected path until a marker materialized within the narrow range of visibility. Finding one marker meant the next was roughly predictable. This was not elegant travel. It was grinding, methodical progress measured in short intervals, but it kept people alive when nothing else could. Sensory navigation filled the gaps that eyes could not cover. Experienced winter travelers learned to read information the environment still provided under low visibility conditions. Sound carried vital clues. The muffled roar of water moving under ice indicated a river nearby and warned of thin ice. The way wind changed pitch around rock formations revealed terrain features invisible in the white. Sudden silence signaled entering a sheltered hollow or passing behind an obstacle. Underfoot, texture and slope offered constant feedback to those trained to notice it. Hard-packed trail felt distinctly different from loose, recently drifted snow. The angle of the ground told couriers whether they were veering uphill or down, information absolutely critical on ridge routes, where a wrong descent could mean sliding into a ravine with no way to climb back up. Some traditions emphasized pace counting, tracking distance mentally through consistent walking rhythm. If a marker should have appeared after a certain number of steps and had not, you had early warning that something was wrong, and could begin correcting before wandering hopelessly far. But perhaps more important than any single technique was the discipline of decision-making under stress. Panic multiplies mistakes exponentially. A courier who became confused and started making rapid, reactive changes in direction was far more likely to become completely lost than one who stopped, assessed the situation deliberately, and made a single careful choice. Historical accounts and ethnographic studies of cold weather peoples consistently emphasize this principle. When uncertain, pause. When visibility drops below critical thresholds, shelter if possible rather than pressing forward blindly. When conditions exceed your preparation, turn back while you still can. This discipline was trained against instincts that screamed to keep moving. Even a courier traveling physically alone was never truly operating independently. The human network behind messenger systems made individual journeys possible, though this support was often invisible in the crisis moment. Station keepers tracked arrivals and departures, noting when couriers left and when they were expected at the next post. If a courier failed to appear within expected time windows, search parties could be dispatched along known routes to find those who had lost their way or become injured. Local guides were sometimes assigned to accompany messengers through particularly dangerous sections. People whose lifelong familiarity with specific stretches of terrain provided knowledge no outsider could replicate, however. Experienced in general. In regions where indigenous communities had developed winter travel expertise across countless generations, their methods influenced or directly supported courier operations. The logistics of preparation were inseparable from navigation itself. Couriers carried survival, not just messages. Layered clothing adjustable to prevent both freezing in rest and overheating during exertion, waxed coverings keeping critical items dry, spare mittens because wet hands became frostbitten hands, provisions calculated for unexpected delays. Animals required similar careful attention. A horse or mule refusing to move forward might sense hazards, unstable ice, hidden drops, drifts too deep to cross that humans could not detect. Ignoring the animal's resistance could be fatal. Learning when to trust a horse's judgment was part of courier training. Reaching the destination depended on remaining functional throughout the journey, and functionality required preparation that began long before departure. Our understanding of these practices comes from a blend of sources, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that each has limitations. Written records from official courier systems describe organizational structures, station placements, and route logistics in considerable detail, but rarely capture the moment-to-moment experience of a rider fighting through a storm. The scribes who compiled these records seldom traveled the worst conditions themselves. Archaeological remains of roads, waymarkers, and station foundations reveal the scale of infrastructure investments. Ethnographic accounts from the 19th and 20th centuries document traditional winter travel knowledge among communities, maintaining practices likely stretching back generations with gradual change. Experimental reconstructions help us interpret what survives. What emerges from this evidence is not a single universal method, but convergent principles appearing across different times and places. Blizzards erase external references, so successful systems either built new references into the landscape or reduced reliance on visibility altogether through other means. Linear routes, physical markers, short relay intervals, local expertise, and trained decision-making substituted for natural landmarks that storms destroyed. Discipline replaced intuition. Fixed rules about when to stop and when to turn back prevented panic from compounding disorientation into disaster. None of this guaranteed survival. Couriers died. Messages were lost. Storms exceeded even well-designed systems. But these networks functioned often enough, across distances and generations, that empires staked their communications on them. And this is the reframe that changes how we see the past. What appears primitive at first glance, a line of stones vanishing into a snowfield, a memorized sequence of landscape features recited like poetry, a rigid rule about stopping when visibility drops below critical range, was in truth a sophisticated navigation culture. It combined landscape literacy, social infrastructure, and disciplined decision-making under fear into a system solving a problem we can barely imagine facing ourselves. We live with GPS satellites, electronic maps, rescue services reachable by phone. Ancient couriers crossed mountain passes in blinding blizzards with none of that, carrying messages that determined the outcomes of wars and shaped the fates of kingdoms. They had no technology as we understand the word, but they had something that might matter more. Systems built from accumulated knowledge across generations, embedded in the physical landscape itself, transmitted through rigorous training and living tradition. The storm has not changed in 10,000 years. Wind still blinds, cold still kills. What those couriers built was a way to move through conditions designed by nature to halt human progress, not by conquering the storm with individual strength or luck, but by refusing to fight it alone. Their survival was never random fortune. It was architecture, route, marker, station, rule, network, and the hard-won understanding that in a blizzard, the only reliable compass is the one you build before the storm arrives.